Sup, Shredders, my name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to SB Interviews, where today I'm going to be chatting to a lovely man named Randal Calcote. Calcote. And if we switch over to here, we have Randal on the screen right now. Everyone say hi to Randal. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Are we being monitored from above?
Monitored potentially by people watching the video, but you're more than welcome to say hello to anyone watching.
Well, hello to anyone watching.
And who is Randal Calcote?
Well, he's the guy sitting across from you holding up the red lighter. I was born here in Texas, about 60 years ago, started playing music about 50 years ago and been doing it off and on ever since. There's a whole lot of other chapters in the middle and in between. Read my book when it comes out in the next life.
Well, actually, you sound like you've had a heck of a story, because when did you get started with this whole music thing?
When I was about 10 years old, my best friend in grade school asked me if I wanted to be in his band, and I said, sure. And they said, sure, he gave me a guitar, gave me some lessons, taught me a bunch of songs, and we went all over the state of Texas playing, little small venues, VFW halls, school auditoriums, country dances, for about the next couple of years. And then I just broke off and started doing it on my own.
See, that's kind of phenomenal. So you did what time had you done all that what time of your life had you done all that touring by? Like, when did you break off?
Well, about the time I was 12, I guess, and there's no way to know, but I'd say as many venues as we played, I probably played for 1 million people before I ever really went solo. And that's just a guess, a wild guess. No one will ever be able to prove it right or wrong.
That's incredible. How does it feel looking back and realizing that you played to that many people at that age?
It was what we did, The guy we were in special ed classes for the blind people, right? He had no eyes. He couldn't see them. I didn't care. All I got to do was get out of the house, have free hot dogs and Cokes, and travel around a bunch and play a bunch of music and, get away from home. And that's just, I look at all of those things. It's all been kind of, it's wrong to say it's magical, because there's a lot of hard work goes into all of that stuff, Made my fingers bleed when I was a wee small kid, but I liked what I was doing. Used to just walk down the street with my guitar strap on my shoulder and figure out old Johnny Cash songs.
Well, it sounds like it was a fairly competitive scene at the time. Is that correct?
Not for our niche. We were kind of like these child prodigy, things. And there was not a lot of that. There were the old ice houses and, little corner pubs and such, I guess you'd call them, where the grown-ups played. But we were just kids, Very few people at our age group were doing that.
That's incredible. And sort of who were your influences at the time?
At the time, I'd say Johnny Cash and Roger Miller and Hank Williams and the old country people, not the modern stuff that sounds just like everybody else, but just like come out of the bluegrass and the blues and the gospel music. And we did mostly Roger Miller, and of course we did some Elvis songs, but I was like, he's a rock and roller. Why are we doing that stuff? But back then, nobody made a difference between country and rock and pop. That was all made up by the record companies later on. You'd hear Johnny Cash on the same station. You'd hear the Strawberry Alarm Clock and the Beatles, and Petula Clark. They were all on the same radio.
Why do you think that was?
Well, because radio, even in the 60s, radio was still a big deal to people, TV was, in those days, black and white, which was really kind of blue and gray, very bad pictures and such. So radio was still a prime entertainment for folks. And if you actually got to go out and see some live musicians somewhere, that was a big deal, so it was wide open.
Because, nowadays you have... radio's obviously the position of radio has changed because there's just so many different ways to get your music. But you can get all sorts of genres. Now each have their little niches now, don't they? Like there's specific stations for everything.
Now so, okay, back then, we're talking like 1970, something like that, early 1970s. There was a station in Houston called KILT. It was only AM at the time. And like I said, they played everything. They didn't, they played it all. it was a business already, but they didn't have the niche going. It was just music. And then we had KCOH, which was, which was the soul music, what they called R&B, which Atlantic made that up so they could stop calling it race records. But there was the black station, and then there was Kilt, which was the everything else station that played everything. So there just really wasn't much going at that time. I think we had about 10 radio stations, and 2 or 3 of them played music.
Oh, there was. It sounds very different. It sounds very different.
It was very different. We didn't even lock our front doors at that time of life, Things were just easier and friendlier. There was about 1.5 million people in Houston when I was first starting to play. And now, I left there about 5 years ago, and there was, last I heard, almost 6 million.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of population growth there.
Oh, big bunch. Big bunch.
That's wild. So obviously, if there weren't as many radio stations play back then, the focus was definitely more on sort of the live stuff?
Well, once again, live stuff, I came from, we were not really poor, but we were not really middle class or anything like that. And going out somewhere, of course, if you went out to a bar back in those days, a beer was 10 cents, now it's $5. So with the population expansion, the inflation expansion, the everything, and more competition. I remember we made a pirate radio station one time and got kicked off the air by the FCC. And I said, well, if we really just want to get out to people, I was one of the DJs there. I said, why don't we just get on the internet? And the guy that was in charge of our station, it's a famous quote, he said, nobody will ever listen to music on the internet. I rest my case.
Because they've said that about a few things over the years. They said that, didn't they say that about CDs and about tape and stuff like that as well?
Oh, well, all of that stuff. And, when I was a kid, my first tape recorder was a reel-to-reel. And there was no software. If you wanted to cut your tape, you literally used a razor blade or a pair of scissors and some Scotch tape. And now I've got 128 tracks on this computer that we're talking on. I do, sessions for me and sessions for other people, and do some sound effects for some movies and, a bit of that stuff, all in this little computer. But, I remember the days. I've still got my splicing block somewhere. It was a brass block about this long that had, about this long, that had, little notches cut in it. So you laid your tape across it and took the razor blade and cut it, and then you put a piece of tape on the back. And then that's how you spliced things together.
I am genuinely interested in that, because I remember doing a little bit of it back in 2011 when I did my diploma in audio engineering, and we just never did more of it. But what was it like having to do that? What was the process like? Was it did it feel really great once you nailed it, or?
Oh, yeah. When I got my first tape recorder for Christmas, about 1973, right? That reel-to-reel. And that weekend, as a Christmas special, they played the Jesus Christ Superstar album over and over. And, with the commercials, and sometimes they'd talk at the beginning or the end of the song. And I recorded it about 5 times. And I took this stack of reels of tapes, 7-inch reels. They were going at 3 3/4. And went through and, what do they call it now? Scrubbed it back and forth. But in those days, you put your finger on the reels and you hit the pause button so the captions move away, and you wiggle back and forth till you get to the place where you want. And you put a little mark on it and take it out and cut it and tape it. And it took me another week to assemble all those things. And I finally got a recording of the whole thing. It was amazing. And I was so proud. That was my first recording project.
I am proud of you. That sounds like a heck of a lot of work. I mean, you get people and they have the computers like their MacBooks, and they just put it together a track in a few hours because they just go boop, 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 boop.
Oh, nowadays we got shuffle mode and you can comp it with playlists and all of this other stuff. Boggles my mind. I mean, I'm getting gooder at it than I used to be, but it's still, it's very frustrating and very satisfying when you finally do nail that take. And I'm pretty good, but we're still sending some of my tapes out to have them mastered, believe it or not, in England. I'm in Texas, which is the middle of the country, And that's where I met Brad, long ago. And he was living in California at the time. And now our tapes are going to England. Our colorist for the video is some other country. I don't know. It's about 4 or 5 different countries involved in this video we're working on now. And it's all over the computer.
Would you like to talk more about the video?
Well, I could talk a bit about it. I think we could do a whole show just on that video. But it started out with a little song of mine I wrote one morning when I woke up from a dream, and I wrote it down, and it was finished. And that was, we recorded it. Brad and I recorded it on his 4-track, 40 years ago. And last year or so, about a year or so ago, we started getting into, I got another Pro Tools studio. My studio went out of business about 12 years ago. So I finally got another Pro Tools rig, started recording songs, and he says, let's do a video. What do you want to do? I sent him the song, and it's 1 minute and 38 seconds. Well, they knew that going in, but I'm working with a whole bunch of different guys in film, and they ended up coming up with this 7-minute thing. And it's like an amazing story that they just pulled out of the song. And they made this video that looks really good, but it's way too long. So I had to put other music in it. And there's 3 songs that are actually in the video. And one of them starts as a reprise, and then we do the featured song, and then we go back to the reprise song, and then we go back to another song, and then back to the reprise. And I don't want to give away too many punchlines. It's kind of like a Grateful Dead song. You want to leave it open to people to come up with their own meaning for it. But they squeezed a whole lot of life. And they found this kid that looks exactly like me 40 years ago. And we even did up the guitar for the film to make it look like the guitar I had back then. And it started out as less than 2 minutes, and I was kind of whining when they said, we got to make it longer, 2 minutes. And I went, what? No, we got to make it longer. And it kept getting bigger and bigger, and it's out of control. But luckily, I've got a lot of good folks that are working on it off on the sides, and like I said, literally all over the world.
That's phenomenal. I'm really happy about this, because apparently you've done a lot of live shows, correct? And you've written like 200 songs. Am I right about that figure?
Around there, the finished ones. I've probably got another couple of hundred that I haven't finished yet, mainly because I haven't had time or tape recorders to do it with. But I have an A list of about 60 songs, which, if you break it down, would be about 7 albums. And we're still working on the first EP. There's a lot. And yeah, I've played a lot of venues. I used to hitchhike back in the 80s and would just go across the country with a little backpack and my guitar and play it all across the country. And we went to Mexico and played a couple of times, and never left the continent except in an airplane.
How does it feel to finally be releasing this music that you've been working on?
Well, on the one hand, feels great because, they're finally going to hear things the way that I heard them up here. And on the other hand, it's a lot of work because, when you play live, you get solo or with a couple of the guys and you're all up there doing things, and it's never going to be perfect no matter how much you rehearse. Matter of fact, Drive By Truckers said never rehearse. But it'll always have some flaws, but that's live and people forgive that. But when you're making a record, it's really got to be perfect because that's what people are going to hear forever. So it's, in that sense, it's very frustrating, and Pro Tools makes it easy to fix mistakes and very easy to find them. So it's never, and I still say there'll never be a perfect recording or performance, but you got to try.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic that you're putting that much effort into it, because this is like one of your first big official releases, isn't it?
Well, it'll be my first official, yeah. I mean, there's all kind of tapes and cassettes floating around, and I'm on some guy's record from a long time ago, but you can barely tell I'm on there. There's a long story behind that one we won't go into just because. But yeah, the only piece of vinyl I've ever been on was that one album. And probably a couple of thousand copies of it floating around somewhere. Brad has one. I used to have one. But it's just buried in the mix. So yeah, doing things, I'm finally getting to do it the way I want to do it, mostly. I mean, there's a little bit of compromise that goes along with the whole process, but mostly these are coming out the way I hear them. And that's very different. And that's, in the end, very gratifying when all the shouting and tape cutting and stuff like that's done.
I suppose the plus side of you having experienced the whole tape thing with recording is that you had to learn to play very, very well. Because if you didn't get the takes right, so I suppose it would have been a nightmare sometimes if you weren't a really sufficiently good player. So that'd be helpful for the current experience, right?
Well, yes and no. Do you know about the 10,000 hours rule?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I've got my 10,000 plus. That's the only reason I'm really well, I had good education and I played with a lot of people that were better than me and a lot of people that were worse than me. But mostly I've done my time. And I like playing stuff I don't know. I like playing it for the first time. I hate rehearsing and all of that other stuff. That being said, I will probably practice one guitar part 100 times before I'll try to record it. And it's still not perfect. So I end up still comping some stuff. But, between those, I've had good training. I got an AAS in recording engineering, and I went to a music high school for music theory and such. Did a year of college, and that was just boring. So I went out to work in the real world. I mean, their seniors in college were doing stuff we'd done in my second semester in high school. So I just wasn't impressed with music school, but I did get good training and good experience and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of playing live and studio and everything else. All of that has put me here where I can do this now.
Well, that's fantastic. I genuinely wish you the best of luck for that, because it sounds like, from what I know, what I understand of what you're up to at the moment, it's sounding pretty promising. Like with obviously with your life, you mentioned hitchhiking and all these sort of, you would have had some adventures.
Oh yeah. Well, I read Woody Guthrie's book, Bound for Glory, back about 75 or so like that. And about 1975, I wanted to be a rock star so I could get me a little country place with a little tiny farm and some goats and chickens and get away from the city, My parents both came from farms and they moved to the city because that was what you did in the 50s. The prosperity and all of the brouhaha, and you go into the city and you make a good living and such. And I spent most of my life trying to get away from the city and move back to the country. So, it's funny, the things just go in cycles like that. But still the same goals. I still just want to get me a little place in the country and some chickens and goats and make my own cheese and my own omelets and grow my own food, all of that.
So is that kind of the end goal with what you're wanting to accomplish with the music that you're going to release?
That's pretty much the big one, I'd say. Have a place to run away to when I get off the road. I'm going to have to find somebody else to take care of my vegetable garden while I'm gone. But details. The devil is in the details.
Because you've also done some other stuff apart from music. Would you like to talk about that?
Oh, well, I haven't robbed any banks. I've never crossed the Atlantic, and I've never killed anybody. But after that, name it, I've probably tried it. And I've failed at more things than most people will ever try, which gives me a large palette of experience to work at, I've had lots and lots of different jobs. I was a massage therapist for a while, which is actually what led me into being a gardener. Golly gee, what else have I done? Oh, I was a salesman on the telephone when I was in junior high, and that's why I hate sales, because I was so good at it. I would stay up at night feeling guilty because I just got all these people to spend their money on this useless muck, So I don't know. I have this problem of talking in broad strokes about myself. I'm really good at bringing up little tales, and because there's tons of them. The problem I have is figuring out which ones to pull out and spread out on the table and say, hey, this is cool, check it out,
I mean, I was provided with a small list of things that you have done at some point or another. Where is my list? Just a moment. We've mentioned the fact that you were a child country musician, a poet.
Oh, yes, much so. For about 10 years, I was in the dead center of the Houston poetry scene, which was really happening in the 70s and early 80s, and did lots of that. I've got about a 40-volume collection of stuff that we need an editor, guys, probably about 3 or 4. There's probably a lot of Drek in there, but I know there's some great stuff. And that's where most of the rest of those other songs are. That second hundred.
What haven't you done?
Well, like I said, I haven't crossed the Atlantic, I haven't robbed any banks, and I haven't killed anybody.
The important stuff.
I've never been in the military. I couldn't get in because of, my vision's poor. So you wouldn't want me on your team because I wouldn't know the difference between you and the enemy at 100 yards. I'd just drop you. That's not a good guy to have on your team. So no military time. Let's see, I've never been really big on business or finance. I'm a terrible business guy. I've failed many businesses because that's just not where my head's at. I mean, I like to make things, do things, and let somebody else count the beans, They can keep a good fair share. I don't care.
No, absolutely fair enough. You mentioned was there a typesetter role at some point?
Oh, yes. I had a job for about a year. Back when I was a photographer, and a friend of mine got me a job with a typesetting company, and the computers were like, okay, you see that unit off to your left there, and I'm sure you got a console in front of you. The computers were huge, and we had little floppy disks, 7-inch floppy disks. One disk would hold the program, one disk would hold 4 fonts, and we typed it up on a big green screen CRT and printed it out on a printer that's as big as your stove. And then cut out all the little strips and set them up on pages with the wax machines. We did all that. Then I moved into the dark room there to do all the PMTs, which was the, photo processing, high contrast and with the silk screening with the little dots, and they gave me that position because they knew I was a photographer. Yeah, I did photography for weddings and I worked for an insurance company for about a month where we had to go out and take pictures of accidents. So we were hoping for what we called a code 3, which meant dead bodies, because that was what was going to pay us the most money per roll. So I rode around with the record drivers taking pictures of named bodies, Weddings were boring. That was just awful. So I didn't do pro photography for too long, but what else haven't I done? Let's see. Let's see. I've never been in demolition, although I love fireworks and building big fires.
No, absolutely. It says you're an actor. Have we talked about your acting?
That lasted for about 10 years. I did a lot of live theater and a few TV pilots that made it somewhere or other, and that was kind of like a passing phase. And I don't even know how I got out of it, but I did about 60 live shows for, different plays. And it used to be really easy for me to pick up a script and have the whole thing down to memory in about 3 days. And I was one of those method actors, Stanislavski and all of that sort of thing. Don't use an accent was what my favorite director spoke. Says no dialects, natural voice. Put yourself in the place and say, what would you do if you were that person? And I think that's the best advice for actors. I mean, there are some situations, obviously, with Tommy Lee Jones played an Irishman, and I didn't even know it was Tommy Lee Jones because he had such a good thick brogue, he come off a lot of intelligent thing, and he didn't even sound like Tommy Lee Jones no more. But for most of the situations, just being who you are, if you can do that and believe it and make them believe it. Like when I look out across the seats in the theater and I see that boat about 3 miles out to sea, and that's what I'm looking at. And that's what you see because you see me seeing it. So that's what the Stanislavski method was really all about in acting. And I don't know if I got tired of it or just moved on to something else. That was a long, long time ago.
Because that would have probably helped. Like, how did all these things you've done outside of music aggregate into your career as a musician?
Well, the music performance and the acting, of course, they go pretty well hand in hand. And learning scripts, learning songs. I used to know about 1,000 songs. I don't remember what I don't remember anymore in that field. But, not being afraid of the crowd. I know when I go out live, once I hit that first song, this is my room. You people are here for me. I'm gonna play for you, but you're here for me. You're mine until I go off. I'm not afraid. And that lets me feed you and you feed me. And that, of course, carried straight on through into the acting, not to mention being able to memorize a lot of things. So, just being comfortable with crowds when you're being something else or someone else. Those two, of course, go really well together. It helped being a photographer because now I know when camera guys yell at me to do this or that, I know kind of what they want and what looks good. So that helps. But I don't know, for the most part, I don't see a lot of overlap between, okay, you throw in the writing. I write poetry and I've written newspapers and technical papers and such. All of those things kind of feed each other. And then you go off into everything else I've done, the photography and the mechanics. Now, mechanics was something that carries through to all the things I do, because once you understand, how a car works. Now, I understand I'm talking about cars from 40, 50 years ago, but how all those systems work together, then you do have, I don't know, I guess a paradigm for things work together in certain ways. And if you understand how each piece fits with the others, then you can build a better mousetrap. That translates to all the other things I've done very well. And photography and music there's light and sound, but they follow the same rules of physics. So those two help. But I don't know, trying to come up, physicists have the same problem. They can't come up with a unified field theory. And I gave up trying a long time ago.
Yeah, you sound like you're the whole package. Has there been a massive change in how you approach the live shows from when you started as to more recently?
Well, I haven't been doing many shows more within the last few years, not just because of this pandemic thing, but because I spent about 15 years in another small town outside of Houston, and there just weren't that many venues. So I went and got me a couple of degrees in different things and didn't have much time for live shows. And I still play, a couple of times a year everywhere, but no, my approach is still the same. When I get up there, I'm there because you want to see me. You wouldn't be there. Maybe not me personally, but somebody. You're there to be entertained. You want a show. And that's what the Beatles learned in Hamburg. The crowd used to go, "Mach show." And you can translate that to cognates between German and English. Mach, make a show. That's what the people want. They want a show. And I got over stage fright a long, 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 long time ago. And ever since then, like I said, when I step up on the stage, however big or small, I know why I'm there, and I still do it the same way. And once I get it going, the first show, I got to warm up my voice for the first song, that kind of thing. But once I hit that stride, then your biggest problem is going to be getting me off the stage.
Because that's the thing I haven't asked about. Like, who have you worked with? What musicians have you sort of jammed with in the past?
Well, let's see, not too many famous people in a long time. I played a show with Tom Russell when I didn't even know who he was. And he has a great song called Gallo de Cielo, which is a song about a fighting rooster. Well, we loved, my girlfriend, wife at the time, loved it. She said that was one of the greatest songs and I should learn it. Well, we went to play some show in Houston. This is when we were in Baytown. We went into Houston to play. And I met this old guy out in the backyard, and we were just sitting around drinking whiskey and doing what musicians do in the backyard, and just playing guitars. And we played for a couple hours, and then I went in and played my set, and he sat in with me, and then he sat in with me, and I sat in with him. And then the next day, Lou goes, that's my wife at the time. She goes, "That's who you were playing with yesterday." Really? And it wouldn't have mattered. I met more famous musicians really when I was working in the business in production support. I would go backstage and had to be mingling with all the bands, and they were all just people, They didn't want to talk about being famous or what big star. A couple of the guys, the guy in America, he was kind of a twit, but most of the other guys I met were just friendly and were happy to just talk to somebody about normal life. Because when we get off stage, that's what we are. As a musician, when I get on stage, you're seeing your show. When I'm off in the studio or practicing or learning a new song, I'm this music guy that's working, But when I'm not doing that, I'm just a guy, Well, hey, what's it going, man? We go have a beer, whatever, we're real people. And that's what most of the musicians I've known, and I met tons of those guys in that context. Now, I played with lots of people who became famous. Billy Gibbons went to the same high school as I did.
Oh,
But we didn't hang out. And even at that time, he wasn't even in, his first band was Moving Sidewalks. He wasn't even in a band yet. So, I mean, I've always brushed up against all these famous guys, but playing with them, I once met a guy in a music store one time and showed him how to play his song. And he got mad and walked out. I don't know. The guy goes, "What'd you say to him?" I said, "Well, I just showed him how to play the song." Because he was detuning one of the strings so he could reach the chords. Well, I had these hands that could go, from here to here on the guitar. So I didn't detune the strings. I thought that's how you do it. And I showed this guy how to play it. And he got mad and walked out and said, "Well, that's the guy that wrote it." Okay. Insert foot in mouth, rotate if necessary. I don't know. That's just me. I'm going to be the same guy to you as I am to. I mean, if Billy Gibbons showed up tonight, I'd be, "Hey, bud, what's up?" Same thing. Just I'm going to be the same guy with all of you.
Well, exactly. I mean, that authenticity is really important. Has your music been inspired? What has your music been inspired by?
Situations in my life, usually very personal. And of course, a lot of them about women. Every now and then I wake up and write a song that's very political, but I'm really not that political. I mean, I just want people to be left alone and get along, But like I woke up one day and I was hearing the news about how we were having another failed campaign in El Salvador. And I wrote this song about it, and it came out and we recorded it the next day, and it went out to limited releases all over nowhere. And that was a political thing. We were walking down the road going to a rainbow gathering one day, me and a friend of mine, and we just said, "We never give any reason." And he'd back a line. We'd make up this little verse, and we were going down the road singing the song. And you may have that one, the one before our time.
I think so. There's ringing a bell.
Backwards guitar and that's railroad spikes and clavis. The railroad spikes are going backwards. That's why they go. But we literally just wrote that song walking down the road going, we don't need a reason. We're just making up a song. So moments in life, that's what inspires me. Abstracts or concepts or belief systems, that's somebody else's trip. I'm about where I've been, what I've done.
Because for you as a musician, I suppose... There's three different questions I want to ask you at the same time, and that's not really a good way of doing it.
Throw them up in the air. Whichever comes down first, you can do that one first, and the others will be there.
I was going to say, how do you balance the needs of yourself to express yourself as a musician with the way that the music industry is headed?
I don't. I'm not good at that. I never have been. I've always been out of sync with the times. And I'm not, there's a lot of people that write for a formula or to get a hit or because they're on contract with the publishing house. And that's why and how they write. They want to write a song like Carole King wrote a string of hits. Her and Neil Sedaka wrote them together. This is back in the 60s and 70s. And they were writing songs that sounded like Petula Clark or whoever else was the hit last week. And that was their job. Well, I'm not a job songwriter. For the first 10 years I played, I didn't have any of my own songs. But in those days, it was also not a big deal. I mean, most guys that were in a band were playing hit songs from the radio, because when you go play at a club somewhere, people want to hear their favorite songs. And we didn't have this big thing about, you've got to have your own songs and your own publishing and your own everything. No, if you're in a band, you want to play the best songs of the time, and you want to do them the best you can. And no matter how hard you try, you'll never sound like the Animals or the Monkees or the Letterman or the Four Tops or the Isley Brothers or Tom Petty. You just never will do it. So I never went at it thinking I need to be like that. When I wrote a song, it was because it was time to write it. And 9 out of 10 songs, when I write it, I just sit down with a pen and I write the song, and then I pick up my guitar and I already know how it goes because it was time to write it. So I wasn't writing to please somebody else. I was pleasing me. And that's ultimately, if I do a good job and I please myself, I'd bet you dollars to donuts that you're going to enjoy it too.
Well, it creates a unique experience, doesn't it? If you're trying to be someone else, it's just more of the same.
Well, yeah, and I can't. I can't be you. You can't be me. So let's be who we are and see how we get along.
And how important do you feel it is nowadays to have your own sort of unique sound with your music?
Well, it's my sound. It's my music. There's still a lot of songs I'd like to cover, with other bands. If I had a band, we would probably learn about maybe a half and half mix, because there's a lot of great songs out there that I grew up with that, I used to do a lot of Jethro Tull, and I did a lot of Cat Stevens, and a lot of Paul Simon. This is back in the day. I even did a lot of Joni Mitchell. Some people thought that was weird. That was before, that's when different gender preferences and such were still in the closet, just not talked about. And what is this guy doing singing all these songs written by a woman, But it's a long tradition among folk singers and actors and everything that when you write something, it's not just a man or a woman that can sing it. If it's a good song, it's a good song. And you do it. So what was the question?
It's okay. The thing with you as a human being is when you talk, I forget that I've even asked a question. I'm enthralled. I'm genuinely enthralled what you have to say, because I was asking what's the importance of having a unique sound, I think, in this day and age. But you answered it so eloquently. You're not one of those musicians who has an ego. You're more than happy to
No. That is a myth. There is no musician or actor or artist who does not have a big ego. Because if you didn't, you wouldn't want to get up in front of everybody and say, hey, look at me.
Oh,
but
no.
You can't have no ego, but you can't let it rule you like, now you need to pay attention to me because I'm the star. No, that's not going to work. But you need to have a good, healthy dose of, hey, I put in the time and I'm good at what I do. And now I'm going to do it for you. And you're probably going to like it. And there'll be people out there that don't, but that's okay. It's a big world full of people and lots of different sounds, and let them all have their time and place. In that sense, you could get confused and think I don't have an ego, but let me disavow of that thought. I have a huge ego, but I also have a huge heart and a huge mind, and they all need to work together.
You're right. It does make sense. When you think of the base of like a human being going onto a stage and playing an instrument in front of a lot of people, you would have to have an ego for that.
Jerry Garcia had stage fright till the day he died. And I never knew that until I saw an interview where he admitted it 40 years ago. And he goes, yeah, the whole band would get on there. We were all scared shitless, but we get on there, so we start real slow, but once we get going, it's cool. And wait a minute, all these 30,000 people are here because they love our music. They're here because of us. So that's what I was talking about when you get over that fear, and then I get out there and I feed you and you feed me back. It's that we're feeding each other thing. You wouldn't be there if you didn't want to see me, and I wouldn't be there if you didn't want to. So it's a circle.
It's just about finding an equilibrium, isn't it?
Something like that. Do as little harm as you can. Have a good time. Hopefully you can bring a whole bunch of people along with you. But if you just get one of them that goes through and has some kind of epiphany or some amazing time tonight, then you've done your job. Maybe even got paid for it. Maybe. A friend of mine told me a long time ago, if you want to make money in music, stop playing for free. Well, you know what happened? I took his advice, and what happened was I stopped playing altogether. It's, again, you got to find the balance between the two.
You've blown my mind. You've blown my mind. Wow, I feel like I've had an epiphany talking to you today.
Maybe some of your viewers will have something like that too. And maybe a few of them can pass it on. It's that circle again, feeding each other.
I mean, like, I've interviewed a few people now, and this is the first time I've had someone who seems to be able to explain that point really well. Because, like, at least here in New Zealand with the music scene, people are either super duper, they don't want to have an ego, right? Or they have an ego that's so overblown it's almost comical.
Well, yeah, because none of those people in both of those groups really understand what your ego is. Ego is basically I am. And if you deny your own existence, you can't meet somebody else and stand up and say, hey, I'm Fred. How you doing? A little protoplasm, let's shake hands and, have a beer. You can't do that without first acknowledging yourself. Then you can open up to other people. This is like what I was telling you. I'm no good at the broad strokes, but, you give me one word that I can latch onto and your biggest problem is shutting me up. So there you go. Anyways, so I guess that was the second question. Do you remember what the third one was?
The third one was, but see, now I want to ask another question because what you've said prompted me to.
Hey, this phone call without pictures would have cost us about $500 by now. And I know that because in 2000, I did an interview with a guy. I think he was in Bavaria, and it cost me $100 a half an hour just for a voice line. That was in my journalist days, and I had a great time with him. And he left me a quote that I've stuck with ever since then. He said, and he came from a pretty well-off position in life, and he told me, money's just the way that uncreative people keep score.
Whoa. That's two epiphanies today.
Well, okay, since that one worked too, I'm going to tell you, that was Lawrence Cherniak. He was the guy that wrote the Great Book of Hemp. And I was interviewing him for Hemp Magazine at the time. But yeah, he was an amazing man, really. I mean, sure, he came from a pretty comfortable family and got to travel all over the world and smoke hemp in all its various forms. And his family got him publishing deals and all this. But I mean, he was an amazing man that traveled the world and met folks both high and low. Yes, pun intended. And he was full of little one-liners like that. But that one stuck with me.
You've given me plenty to think about for the rest of the day.
Cool. Pass it on.
I absolutely will. What do you think the major cultural shifts have been, at least musically, since when you started versus today?
Computers. When I was a kid, I had to learn my chords on the guitar. And I played for about 5 years before I ever went to a music school. But I learned a whole lot of chords, and I got to be as good as I could at playing those chords and singing at the same time. There was a lot of work. Sure, I enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed when we got to go out and play live. But it was a personal relationship between the musician and his instrument, and between the musician and the craft, which is study, practice, listening to a lot of things, looking for new sounds and learning how to imitate that sound. And that's where we all start, whether we're following notes on a piece of paper or sounds on the radio. We start out imitating things that we enjoy, and then we learn to do that. So we had a very deep personal relationship with our instruments. Nowadays, and then this started back in, I guess, the 80s when they started making CDs and samplers. And when Keith Emerson had his Moog, he put wires and did and played and practiced the piano, and he worked really hard. And then Yamaha came along and they solidified the MIDI system and made it universal. They didn't invent it. They made an improvement on it and made it universal and put it in all these little keyboards to where you don't need all those wires and such. And then came computers, and they put all that stuff on a little floppy disk. And now you don't need to know anything about music to sit down there and summon up, Fruity Loops or something like that, and put a bunch of samples in, and boom, boom, instant drummer in a box. Now you've got instruments, MIDI instruments, and they're all prefabbed and looped and such. And the musicians, the people who are making music to them, and there's still plenty of musicians that have deep personal relationships with their instruments, but a large group of people all over the world have all these prefabricated music makers that all they do is push a few buttons and it makes up their stuff. And then, of course, there was a hip hop culture that really came out of, people, poor kids on the streets playing the dozen. So you know what that is.
Vaguely.
Rhyming. It's basically rhyming on who's the cock of the woods. I am, because I can make the best rhymes. And that's where the hip hop culture came from. And that actually came from the Toasters in Jamaica in the 60s, who were doing that while they played the dub records. And so these are the real roots of hip hop, is the Toasters in Jamaica, and then the groups like De La Soul coming in from all over the world and settling in New York and making hip hop. And so there's a lot of personal relationship between the guys that are rapping, spitting beats, as they say when I was in the studio. Spitting beats, that is a craft. But the music that goes behind it is all prefabricated and automatic inside your machine. So the emphasis has shifted from what you say, whether it reflects the culture exactly, away from what I think in my personal world and Ian Anderson would tell a lot of stories that were based on the cultures of England and such. But he was telling individual stories and applying them to his musical craft. And now the majority of the rap thing is about being recognized as who's number one, not who's the best. Who's number one? Not the same thing. So I'd say that the emphasis has gotten way less personal and way less personal, period, in your craft, in your experience, and your expression. That would be the biggest shift.
I'd have to agree with you there.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a thing, okay? We had the big bands and stuff in the 30s and 40s, and they were going through that evolution. Well, Spike Jones was probably the first big band leader to actually do his own business and make an empire. And people followed Spike Jones' model of selling. He sold hard. He drilled his musicians harder than Frank Zappa ever did. And he sold the business. And the record companies learned from people like him. Because when some of the people like Benny Goodman and Billie Holiday came along, record companies wouldn't touch them. The only reason you've heard of Benny Goodman and Billie Holiday is because John Hammond was a producer at Columbia and paid for their first records out of his own pocket. The record companies started getting hip right about the time of John Hammond and Spike Jones. We can sell anything. So they've been perfecting the business over the last 80, 90 years. And it makes sense for them to push the marketing of automatic prefabricated music much harder, because it takes a whole lot less to produce. And when Dr. Dre come out with a whole bunch of beats, he brought up the NWA and the D12, and then of course Marshall Mathers, and so it just makes a lot more sense for them on a business level to produce people that follow that model of composing and performing. Of course, you got your Taylor Swifts and your Kenny Chesneys and what's that guy that I can't remember his name. Now he had a song. I'm not the only one. He was from some other bands or other. People like that, they're still very personally involved with their music, and they're still putting out stuff, and some of them are chart-stopping records. So it's not that it's killed that music, but it's taken dominance with it. But if you look at entertainment history, we had big bands, and then we had the art, rhythm and blues, the race records that became rhythm and blues, that became rock and roll, that became disco, that became new wave, that became the 80s, whatever you call that became the grunge alternative of the 90s, and it's gone back to the hip hop. But they've just been perfecting the business model. And there's a definite evolution. And people were sick of white bread rock and roll when Elvis went in the army and Chuck Berry went to jail. Wayne Newton and Pat Boone took over, and people were sick of that, and they were ready for the Beatles, and they were ready for Jimi Hendrix, and they were ready for Grandmaster Flash, and they were ready for the Ramones, and they were ready for Tom Petty and Nirvana. And I kind of lose touch with the history right around the 21st century somewhere. It just stopped impressing me.
No, fair enough. I think we had like the new metal stuff and then the alt rock stuff, and then we had a resurgence of the kind of EDM stuff, and there was a bit more folk stuff in the mainstream, and then there's progressive metal, and then there are a few other genres that came along the way like trap and kind of the more kind of EDM-y, trappy hip hop. I think you're onto something really important. How much of music today is still dictated by the record labels?
I'm not a business major, but I guess that about somewhere between a third and a half of it is. The independent artists or independent labels or the streaming services are taking up a large share of the market, but there's still a whole lot of people that turn on the radio and buy or stream what they're told to stream by the biggest ad budgets. And I'm like I said, I'm not real current with who's on top or whatever, but that part hasn't changed and will not change as long as we have a massive and especially an international culture. There will be businesses who will invest in advertising and promoting, and they will get a large share of the revenues. They will get the largest share of the profits. Historically, the artists always get the smallest cut. The people who put up all the money and do all the legwork and all the promotion and all the distribution are going to get the largest share, which is pretty much reasonable. But it's shifting, and now there are a lot more options for independents. But that also means there's a lot more competition for independents. It used to be all you had to do when your band came to town was print up 100 flyers at Kinko's and go stick them on phone poles and give away a few tickets, and you could get people coming to your shows, and you could sell your T-shirts and your CDs, and you could make money like that. Well, that doesn't work anymore. Now you have 50 million forms of media, streaming service channels, Spotify's, all this. What do they call it? I have both of these things. I'm listed with ASCAP. They're the PRO, performing rights. So if I perform live, they'll negotiate, settle, and make sure I get paid for my live shows. But on the internet, you have all these different places all over the world that they might stream my song through 15 different platforms, or it might get used in a film. And what do they call that? Distribution. Distribution admin. And those guys will monitor the electronic presentation, and they will see that I get paid. So far, I'm paying in. I haven't been paid back in terms of money. I'm paying in, and I'm learning how to do it as we go along. And used to be you could get a How to Do This for Dummies. Now you can get 200 of those. And it's hard to get one in a paperback or a solid back anymore. And they're all out of date by the time they reach the printer. So it's the Wild West all over again.
So I guess what's your main strategy then moving forward with your own music?
Try to get some good recordings. That's my primary goal. Then get them out there where people hear them. And ultimately, I'd like to be able to get out and do live shows, do bigger live shows than I've done in the past. That's the thing. Just get the music out there. That's number one for me. And good quality recordings that I'm happy with. Then, get them out and get them distributed and get people's attention to where one of these days this, 200 years to flatten the curve thing is going to be over, and we're all going to go back to normal to a certain extent. And when that time arrives, I want to be able to go out and play shows, travel around, get that high. That's my thing. Play the shows and then run away to my little tiny farm in the middle of nowhere that nobody knows about with my 20 or 30 people who take care of my vegetable garden while I'm gone. That's kind of the big plan. See how boring that sounds compared to what you ask when you ask me those questions where I just go off on a rant? I'm just not good at those broad strokes.
You've done a super, honestly, I think, sorry to not agree with you on it or to be disagreeable. I think you've done a fantastic job. I think it's phenomenal that you're talking about just wanting to have these boring things because, it just sounds so peaceful and so chilled out and relaxed and nice.
I'm ready for a vacation. And you don't have to wait till I go on vacation to disagree with me. It's totally fair to disagree, as long as you're not throwing rocks and burning down my chickens or something like that. It's totally cool to disagree all you want. There's plenty of room for opinions, as long as we can still just get along.
Because from what I understand, you've been fairly busy in the Houston music scene, right? What are some of your favorite interactions that you've had with people over the time you've been a musician?
Oh, that's one of those broad strokes. Ask me about the time in 1974 when I don't know, man. It's really what my favorite ones were playing. I guess the big shows, the biggest. We used to have a thing called Houston International Festival back in the 70s. Well, I guess it was the 80s. But the most fun I used to have was I would just go out there and literally just pick a corner. They would have, thousands of people roaming the streets, vendors, food, beers, souvenirs, whatever, little different stages where people were performing. I never got one of those paid shows, but I would go sit on the corner and open up my guitar case and would sit there and, have some beers and whatever else came by during the day and just play for hours. And at the end of the day, I'd made more money than the guys on stage. And that was to me, that was the audience giving back to me. And for me, having a good time, and we're talking nickels, dimes, dollars. Every now and then somebody throws in a $5 bill, but you're doing it for hours at a time. And that's just the doing it. To me, that's the most rewarding. And when you sit down with somebody that, a musician who's better than me and just blows my mind, and all of a sudden I hear him do a little riff, and all of a sudden I know something I didn't know yesterday. That's probably the best part, when I'm up there live doing my thing, and all of a sudden, instead of being the guy that's putting out the music and entertaining you, some guy sitting there next to me plays a note or something, and all of a sudden I get an epiphany. That's got to be the ultimate, when I get better right in front of everybody else.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. That's awesome.
That's why I do it. It's the most fun I can have with my clothes on. I've been saying that for years, and a couple of years back, somebody told me that that was how Miles Davis' autobiography opens up. He says, "I blow the horn, and that's the most fun I can have with my pants on." And I never read that book, but Miles was kind of the same way. I mean, his time was when we're jamming. That's what we do. We're musicians. We play music. All this other stuff, Okay, I go ahead and get Colonel Parker to come and take all my money. I get to be Elvis, and I'm a multimillionaire. And Colonel Parker got rich too, but Elvis was lucky. He didn't have to do all the business. He just got to play music. He had his own story that was full of ups and downs, but he played music, and he got paid for it. And somebody else got rich too. That's what I'm saying. There's plenty to go around.
That's fantastic. And Randall, your love for music has it remained the same over the years, or has it grown stronger?
Well, are you married?
No.
You got a girlfriend, don't you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then this still works. You have great days, and you have days when it sucks just to get up and see her still sitting there at the table or stomping down the hall in a bad mood, And that's all part of it. You don't pick music. It picks you. You're in God, I hate the R word, a relationship, and it's going to be good sometimes, and it's going to be bad sometimes. And, heaven and hell on the same biscuit. So yes and no. It hasn't changed a bit, and it'll change again tomorrow. And as soon as I get done with this musician life, I'm going to come back from the bardo and be a Buddhist monk or something, And I'll probably be saying about the same thing.
And what would you say to a younger you or someone else getting started with music in regards to what you've learned or what you know now about it?
Oh boy. Practice, practice, practice. That's how you get to Carnegie Hall, and that's why I didn't. No, I don't. Do it. If you like it, do it. If you don't like it, go be a truck driver. But if you like it, you're not going to be able to get away from it. So just stick with it. And it's going to be the ups and downs, but just do it.
It's straightforward advice, but it's literally, it's about not overcomplicating it, isn't it?
Well, it's about, I couldn't tell me what to do 40 years ago. I can't tell you what to do. If you ask me, what do I do about the tobacco worms in my tomato garden? I can tell you what to do about that. But what should you do with your life? Do it. It's your life. Live it. You'll succeed. You'll fail. You'll love it. You'll hate it. But I can't tell you what to do. And, you can tell me what to do if I work for you. I'm loading the trucks in your warehouse or something. That's fair. You should tell me what to do in that condition. But living our lives, we come together, we meet. Hey, man, what's going on? We get along pretty good, whatever. If I see you kicking a dog, I'm going to tell you not to do that. But basically, I can't tell you what to do, and you can't tell me what to do. You should already know, and I should already know. And if we don't, it's my job and it's your job to learn.
Well, thank you very much, Randall, for the chat that we've had today. Before we go, is there anything that you'd like to say to the people watching about the music that you're working on or any future projects?
Well, I'm going to give you a fair warning. If you only like death metal, or you only like hip hop, or you only like elevator music, don't waste your time listening to me. But if you have a mind that's open and I got that mosquito. I'm getting good at that. If you like different kinds of music, or if you're open to want to hear something, the majority of my stuff is just beautiful music. There's some rock influence and some classical influence, but if you just want to hear stuff that's just good, honest music that, really sounds good. If you're looking for something that sounds like your favorite hit record, keep looking, because there'll be plenty of choices. But you're going to hear something over here on my end of the tuba that's not all over the place, but it comes from all over the place because I had great influences. I stand on the shoulders of giants, the giants of music for the last 500 years. So I know I'm doing good. And if you give it a shot, it's like if you come into the place where I'm playing, 1 in 100 people is going to walk out and say, "Ooh, that sucked." But you're going to like it. So don't expect what you've already been hearing. Give it a listen. If you like it, keep on playing.
Well, thank you. I know I said it before. I'm going to say it again. Thank you for your time today, Randall. It was fantastic to chat to you about your music and your life. And I wish you the best of luck in future with your musical endeavors.
Well, thank you there. And when you get on the Learjet and we'll stop on over here down on the Texas coast, and we'll go have a beer out here, and I'll show you what it's like in the swamps. I don't know where you're from. New Zealand. I knew a lady from New Zealand. I taught her how to build websites, but we never really talked about what it was like there. And so come on over to Texas sometime soon, and I'll show you the swamps. Until then, namaste.
Namaste. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too now. Good night.
And that was my interview with Randal Calcote. Calicote. Apologies. I've been told it is not Calicote, it's Calcote. That's just my accent. My voice is broken. I have to admit, interviewing someone of Randall's tenure and experience is terrifying for me. Even though I've done a few of these interviews, they're always different, but I loved chatting to Randall about his music and his life, and he's such a thoroughly interesting musician, and I genuinely look forward to sort of hearing more of what Randall is going to get up to in future. So if you enjoyed listening to Randall talk, and if you enjoyed listening to me stumble through questions, please do go show Randall some love via his various social medias. And I'm assuming that he will have some music online at some point soon. And if they do, I'll put the links in the description. And stay cool and stay safe. And please support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as need the hell more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. Catch you in next interview. Spider hands up.